Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I'd begun to think I'd been invited up here to speak to Denny's new women's group, but... Sure glad you fellas showed up, because... See, it's a good thing that some time will elapse before he drives me back, if he drives me back to my car. I feel right at home in Santa Maria, and I feel at home with the Glines family. We've taken this program apart many times and put it back together. There's one thing that we've never been able to do. We've never been able to find anything in this book that wasn't completely necessary for the success of this program, and we've never been able to improve on it one iota. And I guarantee you that if Denny Glines and I can't, we might as well just all accept it the way it is. You know? It says in this great book, this textbook for living, for those of us who are alcoholics, that when we talk or when we carry the message of recovery, and isn't that what we're trying to do when we talk, that we always tell what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. And so I know that I have a responsibility to identify myself as an alcoholic beyond just the statement, Wynn Law's alcoholic. And if you'll bear with me then, I'll tell you a story that I think describes my alcoholism better than anything else I could tell you. And those of you who've heard it before, just tune out or turn off for a moment. A great many years ago in Los Angeles, I was invited by some very dear and close friends of mine to a very formal dinner party in honor of the mayor of Fort Worth, Texas. And as I always say, I have an awful lot of respect for Texans. I married two, and you know, out of 50, you wouldn't choose two from Texas if you didn't respect them. And I loved these friends, and I wanted to go to this dinner, and I wanted to be dressed to the teeth, and I wanted to be on my very best behavior. Now, I was sort of in the middle, I guess, of my active alcoholism, and I've come to know that I lived constantly in a state of preoccupation with alcohol in those days. Do you know about this? This constant thinking of how much I'm going to drink, or when I'm going to stop, or where I'm going to get it, or where I'm going to get the money, or how am I going to get out of it, or whatever, you know, but it was always alcohol involved. I lived in a constant state of preoccupation with alcohol in those days. And this dinner party was no exception. I had to make a decision, I thought, about how much I was going to drink on this occasion. And I was very serious about this, just like I had the power to make a decision. You know I didn't, but I hadn't said to myself yet, the power of choice has been removed for you. I was still able to kid myself and say, I will decide how much I'll drink on this occasion. And so I made a resolution and discarded it and made a new one. And I finally concluded that I'd take 2 drinks, no more. Under no conditions would I have more than 2 drinks at this dinner party. The day of the dinner rolled around, and I remember I changed costumes that day 3 times. I didn't just change clothes, I changed costumes 3 times. I was going to make an impression on the mayor of Fort Worth, Texas. And I went to the dinner party, and I had my 2 cocktails. And as I said, I was in the throes of alcoholism, which means that I was in the throes of this twofold disease of alcoholism. The obsession of the mind coupled with the allergy of the body. Allergy in this sense, I'm told, meaning sensitivity to a given product or substance, in this case alcohol. And perhaps you know how the allergy works too. That once we've taken a drink of anything with alcohol in it, how the craving rises up within the alcoholic for more to drink. And how the obsession of the mind started the whole thing in the first place. And so after these 2 drinks, this craving for more to drink was stronger than anything else within me. William James tells us that when the will and the imagination come into conflict, the imagination always wins. I'll subscribe to this. It certainly did with me in any event, and so I had my 2 drinks, and the craving was more powerful than anything else that I could think about. I still was mentally sober enough to not want to drink anymore at this party, and I had to find a way to get out of there and get home, where I had a 5th of whiskey, and that was all I could think about. And I had to have an excuse that I thought was socially acceptable, to leave this very formal dinner party before dinner. And I thought of everything that sounded reasonable to me, and with my great talent for rationalization, I came up with an excuse that was completely satisfactory to me and seemed to be to my host and hostess. I developed an excruciatingly painful migraine headache. Now, I've never had a migraine in my life, but I'd always heard they come on very suddenly, that they're just excruciatingly painful, that you can't see, you're blind, and that everybody would understand a migraine headache. And they seemed to. They were sorry, they said, to see me go. And I went home and drank whatever part of that 5th of whiskey was necessary to black me out on my feet, which was my alcoholic pattern. And like the true alcoholic I am, I went back to the party. Now, I had on still another costume on the second cruise. I had cold cream all over my face. My hair was up in curlers. I had on white satin sleeping pajamas, which I've always thought was a real act of God, because I don't sleep in pajamas. And I was barefoot, and I'd come in a taxi, and you had to know this because you had to pay the taxi driver, of course. And I've often wondered in passing whatever became of those dear and close friends of mine in L.A. I lost more friends that way. But because I know there are a number of women drunks here tonight, and I feel like some of them might know what I'm talking about, even if you men won't understand this, I'd like to tell you that the next time the mayor of Fort Worth came to Los Angeles, I was the only person he called. I see some of you girls do understand this. And at this point in time, I was only getting ready for this program. I had a lot further to go. I had a ways to go. A cold, lonely, frightened, all too long way to go before eventually I came home to AA. And at the end of that long, dark, cold road, I made a decision and I surrendered. But I made a decision to die and I surrendered to death, not a decision to live, and my surrender was not to life, not to sobriety or sanity, not at the end, not right away. Instead, I decided that I would die of alcoholism. That was the real fast way to do it. And I knew that you could, too. I knew that you could because members of my family have died of alcoholism. I've observed it, so I know you can die of it, whether it's the malnutrition that comes as a result of the extensive drinking or what. It's not important. Alcoholism is fundamentally the cause of death, it seems to me. And so I thought, well, I'll get out of this rat race I'm in. I can't control any part of it anymore. There's no way I can live like this, but I can die. And then if there is anything at all, like some people seem to feel there is, maybe next time I'll get a blueprint or some kind of a map that will let me know how to live in this world too. And so I stayed drunk around the clock for 60 days to die. Now, they tell me some interesting things about the 60 days, and I have to take their word for anything at all that happened, because I don't remember. The only recollection I have at all is a quick flash of horrible reality that if I didn't get another crock, I was in some danger of getting sober, and I certainly wasn't going to let this happen, you know? So they tell me, for instance, that I canned 134 pints of strawberry preserves during the 60 days. And I find this extremely interesting because I don't know how to can strawberry preserves. And because I'm the obstinate Mick and alcoholic that I am, I'm not about to learn, and or, you know, I'll never spoil the story. So they tell me I did this. They tell me that I threw everything in the house into the washing machine every day. And that when I couldn't find anything else at my house to wash, I'd go over to my mother's and get everything she had to wash. Maybe a pro would tell me I felt dirty. I don't know. I was working my way through my fourth marriage. In fact, it was over. It just hadn't quit, you know. And that didn't bother me at all at that point in time. And my mother interfered with my life again, like she did so frequently in those days. And she said, something's got to be done about this. I've often thought she did this out of sheer exhaustion. I was one of those drunks that didn't sleep, and if I didn't sleep, you didn't sleep, you know, and I suspect that it was some form of self-defense that made her say eventually, something's got to be done about this. She must be sent to a sanitarium, or she must be committed, or something must be done to bring this to a grinding halt. And it was then she called a doctor in San Diego and asked him what she should do. And I welcome every opportunity I get to thank the medical profession, the men and women in this profession who have taken the time and the trouble and who have the real concern, not just the professional concern, but the human concern needed to find out about this program of recovery, so they can tell family members and alcoholics about the AA program and to go there for help. And this doctor was one of those. And he said to my mother, call Alcoholics Anonymous. And my mother said, oh, I can't call anybody. You've no idea what shape Wynn is in. I couldn't ask anybody to help with this. Just tell me where I should take her, what I should do with her. And he said, call Alcoholics Anonymous. Look in your phone book and call your LA Central office. He was in San Diego, of course. And Mother called the central office in Los Angeles. And Phil Levy was in the office. And Mother told him a doctor had told her to call. And she described her daughter and her state at that point. And Phil said, don't worry about it. We'll send some people out tonight to see her. And Mother said, I don't think you understand. She isn't a very nice person when she's sober, and when she's drunk, I just don't think you want to send anybody out here, and I think I should tell you what she's like. And Phil said, we know what she's like. Leave it to us now. You turn this over to us, and we'll handle this for you. Oh, how lucky I was. How lucky to come into an area, a geographic area, of enthusiastic AA members who made calls in order to maintain their own sobriety, who never said, does she want it? Did she ask for it? You know, what does he say about this? There were no such questions in this area in those days. Thank God, for I wouldn't be here tonight if there had been, for none of the questions could have been answered to that satisfaction had that been the way AA operated. But instead, Phil said, there will be 2 AAs come out to see her tonight. And sure enough, they did. And they came knowing that I was drunk, knowing I hadn't asked for it, knowing that I was very nasty and would probably read them off, and they came anyway. Oh, I can remember how I had to be reassured on this point. How often I asked in the next few months, tell me again why you came to see me when I was in that condition, and how patient they were as they told me over and over. Well, we didn't come for your sake, not really. We didn't come for your benefit, not really. Oh, it's great, they'd say, to see an alcoholic get sober and recover from this disease, but that's the secondary dividend. We came because we know that this kind of service gives us sufficient spiritual reward that we maintain our own sobriety. That's why we came, for our own sake, for the spiritual benefit, the spiritual insurance of calling on another drunk. And another great book says, call on the sick, and I suspect that's what it means too. And so they reassured me in the months to come. Mike said that night that I asked him a lot of questions, that I seemed to have them all ready for him, and that I answered every one of them to my complete satisfaction before he could get his mouth open. And he went away that night, he said, saying, well, isn't it too bad, but obviously she isn't ready for this program. And the next night, 2 more came to see me. The little mix we used to call Ruby and Eddie Gibbons, the little mix. And they came knowing that I was drunk and that I hadn't asked for it and that some AAs had been there the night before, and they came anyway. And Eddie talked a language that night that I could understand, a language I didn't know that anybody else in the world knew but me. For he took a look at my bottle, and there was about that much in a pint, and he said, is that all the whiskey she's got? And when they said yes, he said, you better get down and get her another crock, because that isn't going to last her all night. And nobody had ever said, go get her a crock, you know. But that was really the very least of this terrific communication that happened between Eddie Gibbons and me. It was not just his knowing that there was just that much in a pint that was important. He was saying to me all the things that I didn't know anybody else knew. He was saying to me that he knew what it's like at 4 o'clock in the morning when the whiskey's burned out of you, and the sweats and the jingles and the shakes are there, and there's nothing in the house to drink at 4 o'clock in the morning when the human vitality is at its lowest ebb. He knew about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't know that anybody did. And he was saying that he knew what it was like to have the cramps hit your feet and legs, when your toes are going to touch your heels in spite of all you can do, and you get up and stand first on one foot and then on the other. In the first stages of withdrawal, medicine says, the calcium's burned out of the body. And Eddie knew that because he knew that wasn't enough whiskey to get me through the night. And he knew something else that probably saved my life, and I never want to forget it. He knew that I was in no condition to make any kind of a decision. But he knew that I had the right to get sober, to make a decision. And he said to my mother, she must be allowed to get sober and then make a decision. And if she wants to go on drinking, okay. But if she wants to get sober, let her decide to get sober, because only she can do what's necessary to get sober and stay sober for her. So she must be allowed the right of a sober decision. And they sent me to a sanitarium to be dried out. And I would love to tell you that I was one of those two who stood high on a mountain and felt the cold wind. But I didn't. I came out so mad that I was just fit to be tied. I had a brand new resentment, just like I needed a new resentment. I can't even look back and understand today how I could have stacked another one on, but I came out with a dilly. I was mad. I came out fully aware for the first time in my life that as a practicing alcoholic, I have no rights. You've taken all of them, you may, for I have forfeited all my rights when I'm a practicing alcoholic. You can do anything you want to with me. I know you can. You can throw me in jail when I'm a practicing alcoholic. I know. I went twice for being drunk in an automobile. They even tell me that I needn't have gone at all for being drunk in an automobile. That they would have let my stepfather limp on home with maybe an officer at the wheel to get the car home and not booked us at all. But I insisted on outlining their ancestry in a way that they found unacceptable, and when I got through, of course, they had to throw us in jail. And so I know you can throw me in jail when I'm a practicing alcoholic. You can cut off my whiskey. I know this, for it's been done. You can take away my money. You can slap me in an alcoholic sanitarium. You can do all of these things, and I will have said you may, because I cannot defend myself, for I have forfeited my equality. I've given it up. And it made me mad. And it seemed to me that no matter where I started with this thinking, I came back to one ultimate conclusion. The only way I could beat this rap was to get sober and stay sober. Then I got my equality back, you know? Then I could think it over again and see if there was an angle I'd missed. But in the meantime, the only way I could get equal and get my rights back and start running the show to my satisfaction again was to get sober and stay sober. And I came out determined on that basis to give Alcoholics Anonymous a break and attend a meeting. And I attended my first meeting at the motion picture group at the Old Masters Club in Hollywood on a Sunday night. I don't know for sure that I remember this before I went into the meeting, but they used to tell me, and it seems to me I remember it, that they said to me, there's only 3 things that we ask you to remember before you go into this meeting, as you go into this meeting. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. We think these are the 3 essentials, and if you can just remember these 3 things, they'll be enough, they said. Well, somebody read something out of a book that night at that meeting, and a man got up and talked. And I guess I was 6 months learning it was Casey Greenfield, an ex-cop. Could have been one of those whose ancestry I knew so well, I don't know. But I didn't know that night who he was or what he talked about or anything. But it didn't make any difference to me. Something happened to me despite all of that in that room that night. that made it absolutely unimportant to know what had been read or what had been said. And isn't this great that somebody as rum-dum as I was could have something happen to them that they could understand, something that created a craving that was far in excess of any craving for alcohol she had ever experienced? Because this thing that happened to me was an emotional thing. It was a thing of the feeling, a thing of the senses, and it had nothing to do with the intellect, thank God. It was something I felt in that room that night. And for a long time, I called it the thing in the room at an AA meeting. I had no other name for it. And it was enough. It was enough to get me all through that night without having to take a drink. And it was enough to get me all through the next day without having to take a drink. And it was that thing I felt. And I can remember how during that next day, from time to time, I'd have little physical twinges. And they were of a new kind. And I didn't know what they were for the longest time. And finally it dawned on me, this twinge, this thing I was experiencing was anticipation. I hadn't had anticipation in so long, I didn't recognize it. And it hit me that day. Every time I remembered that tonight there was another meeting and I could get to it, and maybe there would be that thing in the room again. And that night I went as far from the Maskers Club as I could go, way out on Hoover Street to the old Mayflower group. And I decided that I'd see whether that thing had just been in the Maskers Club or whether maybe it would be in another meeting. And I walked into that meeting by myself. Now, for the sake of you gals who think that Denny Glines is your higher power, let me tell you something. When they used to say to me, didn't it get to you to walk in that meeting alone? How could you bring yourself to do that? Now, if any of you gals were bar drinkers, think with me for a minute. Did you have to have a buddy walk into a bar with you? And we all knew what our chances were in a bar if we were bar drinkers, didn't we? We knew this. Didn't matter what we said to ourselves, we knew our chances, didn't we? And if we had the guts to walk into a bar by ourselves, shouldn't we be able to walk into a group of sober, loving, helpful AA members by ourselves? Really, Denny? And so you see, this was not the easiest thing that I'd ever done. And the reason it wasn't the easiest thing, I guess, was because I hadn't had a drink in order to get the courage to do it. But it was as easy as walking into a bar by yourself when you haven't had a drink. And it did look like a long, old, cold American Legion Hall, until a beautiful woman with a beautiful smile on her face came walking up to me with her hands outstretched, and she said, "Hello, my name's Myrtle. Are you new here, or are you visiting from another group?" And she just went on talking, you know. Myrtle Snyder knew that I was new. And she said, "It doesn't make any difference, really. Let me take you down here and introduce you to some of our friends. Our friends." And she took me down to the very first row. I still usually sit down there. I like it. And you moved over that night, and you made room for me. And because I'm a little self-conscious about all this weight I've gained, I usually say you didn't have to make as much then as you do now. But I suspect you'd make enough for even now, you know, if somebody brought me down to you, for I've never seen you turn down anybody. And you moved over that night, and you made room for me. And you gave me a sense of belonging that night that I'd never had any place else in my whole life. the first time in my life I was conscious of belonging to the group I was in. And sure enough, there was this thing in the room. I find it in every AA meeting I go to. I came to know, of course, that you bring it with you. Is why I always find it. Doesn't make any difference where you are. You will have brought this thing with you. This spiritual way of life that you live. That emanates from you, and the power of this group rises up and is ever there and produces this sense of great emotional fulfillment and spiritual fulfillment for the sick alcoholics that walks into the AA group. Well, it was a round-robin meeting. And I didn't hear anything for a long time, and I'll tell you why, because an interesting thing came out of this recently. There was a bird up in the rafters. At least I thought there was a bird up in the rafters. And I kept looking up kind of surreptitiously when I thought nobody could see me look up, and then I'd look down and I would think, gee, I wish that bird could find its way out of the room. And it wasn't, I guess, until a speaker said, gee, I sure wish that bird could find its way out of the room, that I really began to relax, and then I could hear what people said from then on. And in March, Norm Alpy and Chuck Chamberlain and I were in Toronto, Canada, and Chamberlain got up to speak on Sunday and said, if any of you doubt there was a bird in that room, I was at that meeting too, you know? So now there were two of us who saw the bird. And a man got up to speak that night, and he was shaking just in a way that fascinated me. I've never seen a human being shake like Gus did. And he said that he didn't usually shake like that, but that he had had a real bad dry drunk, and this was the physical manifestation of the thing that had happened to him. And it got my attention. I'd never heard of a dry drunk before. And he said that something had happened to him that had truly rocked him. A real emotional, traumatic experience had come his way. And he'd reacted to this exactly as if he were on a drunk. It was in a squirrel cage. New word. I loved it. It was so descriptive. And he couldn't get out of it. And he just didn't even think about anything except getting drunk until he remembered that at every meeting he'd gone to, somebody had said, if something happens to you that you can't cope with, and you're in a squirrel cage, get to the phone right away and call another member of Alcoholics Anonymous and get to a meeting just as fast as you can. And because he had remembered this, he got to the phone and called an AA member who could talk with him until he could get hold of himself, and then he got to a meeting. And because he had done these things, he had weathered this experience without having to take a drink. And you were giving me the big news now. I didn't have to drink anymore, you were telling me. And I'd had to drink for a long time. So you see, this was bigness. And I began to collect your telephone numbers. Everybody's I could get went into an address book. And a nickel got put on there with Scotch tape, so I'd always have that chit for the telephone. I had that first book. I outgrew it very shortly, and I needed a bigger one, you know, because they just kept piling up. And the nickel's still on it. And it saved my life many times, and it's a process I can't recommend too highly. And we hear a lot about anonymity, and you're darn right I believe in anonymity at the public level. You bet I do. I think it's going to save this fellowship for the alcoholics who need it so desperately. But among ourselves, here in the family circle, let's get acquainted with each other. And let's exchange names and telephone numbers, for our very lives may depend on each other, every now and again, even at 4 o'clock in the morning once in a while. And we owe that to each other. And then let's protect each other's anonymity outside the confines of this family, just as we ask ours to be protected, for all the reasons that are built into this AA program, in order that those who are still afraid may come as anonymously as they choose to come. And that we egocentric maniacs, may, through the necessity of anonymity, be beaten into some form of humility instead of exploitation on the outside, the dramatic story that we hear too often told. But among ourselves, within our family, let's share this thing that we must either give away or lose, for we can't hold it. It's give it away, use it, or lose it. We know this, don't we? And we don't want to risk it. And so I began to go to a meeting every night. Every night someplace, every night a new experience. And I began to listen to those who had been around for a while. I found a man named Cliff Walker who had been sober without a drink for 6 years, and I followed him like a tailgater. And I listened to him because he kept saying, I did this, I took this step, and this is how I took my inventory, and this is how I made my amends, and he spelled it out for me so that I could begin to do these things the same way. Now, I had a problem with God. I was willing, but I had a real problem with finding God because I'd been a real hard practicing agnostic for a lot of years. And if any of you have ever practiced agnosticism, then I'm sure you will agree with me that this is darn near a full-time occupation all by itself. You have to work all the time on being agnostic, The evidence to the contrary is around you so abundantly that you keep having to defend your position all the time. And so I'd read everything I could find to defend my agnosticism. And all of you kept saying God as you understood him, and you kept saying to me God as you, Wynn, understand him, and I didn't understand him at all. And so I began to get up every morning and I'd pray and meditate, and I'd do these things that I was learning from you at meetings and from the book and in gab sessions after meetings and on social occasions, because our social occasions always wound up to be AA meetings, no matter where we started. And so I began to practice believing. Because in 100 different ways you said to me, act as if I am and I will be. And I began in time to understand this beautiful message in the Bible. And I began to believe that if I practiced faith in God, faith would come, because this book told me over and over again that this was all that was necessary. In the beginning was a willingness to come to believe. And so I became willing. And one night at a meeting, a gal got up and said, we need some people out at Norwalk State Hospital just to show up out there on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock to show the patients out there that there really are sober members outside the hospital. 9 o'clock on Sunday morning's a pretty rough go. And the next Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, I bounced out to Norwalk State Hospital and sat down, and I went there to be an example. And little did I know that for the next 5 years, every morning Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, I was going to be out at Norwalk State Hospital being an example, because I didn't know that they were just looking for a willing chairman, to dump it on. And I accepted this great honor, and I loved every minute of it, and I wouldn't take anything in the world for this experience. For what this 5 years doing institutional work did for me personally, I couldn't begin to ever recount to you. But I continued to go to Norwalk, and by that time we had a women's group and a men's group and a patients group, and we were really rolling with AA. And one day I made a telephone call at 2 o'clock in the afternoon by appointment to an attorney downtown, and he was supposed to tell me what time the next day I would come down and collect $1,000 that he had got for me that had been owed to me for a long time. And I called him, and he said, "Wynn, I'm afraid I've got real bad news for you. I failed to get something entered in this paper, and I guess if you get this $1,000, you're going to have to go back to court to get it, and it will probably cost you that much, because I wouldn't be able to handle it, of course, again." And I hung up, and I thought, well, I'm in a state of shock. I don't feel anything, but in a minute I'll be all right, and I'll be over there in that DeSoto, and I'll be down at 7th and Spring, and I'll scratch his eyes out, and just a minute, just any minute, I'll be back to normal, and I kept walking across the campus, as we used to call it, and I got up to that woman's ward, and the door clanged closed behind me, and I still wasn't mad. And one of the patients said, "What's the matter with you, Wynn? You look puzzled." And I said, there's the word, I am puzzled. I should be just mad as hell, and I'm not. And I can't understand it. And she said, "What happened? Tell us about it." And I told him. And she said, "What'd you do when you got up this morning?" And I said, "Oh, the usual thing. I prayed for protection against a destructive behavior pattern." She said, "Well, you got it." And I'm afraid, like the minister in the tire experience, I'm afraid I said, "Well, I'll be damned," because I sat down, because sure enough, this thing was working. This thing was working with such simple little effort on my part, such big rewards I was beginning to get. And one day I got a call about a girl that was very seriously sick. And she had said she was going to kill herself, and we had good reason to believe that she probably was. And they asked me if I'd get to her as quickly as I could, and I said, "Yes, I will." And I rolled over Century Boulevard and looked down, and I was out of gas. Now, this is no big deal as a rule, but I realized when I looked at that gas gauge that the key to the lock on the gas tank was in Hollywood, and all I had was an ignition key in that car, that in my carelessness I picked up the wrong keys, and there was a lock. And berating myself with half my mind and praying to God that I would not let her suffer because of my carelessness, I coasted into a filling station, and I coasted up to a pump and said to the man as I handed him my ignition key, "Fill it up, please." And he said, "That's your ignition key." And I said, "Yes, I know, but fill it up, will you?" And he did, because it opened just like that. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that God came down, and suddenly changed the lock on the tank, because I don't believe that. I think the key would always have worked. But neither George nor I knew that it would work, so of course we always carried two and insisted on using two, because we didn't know it would work. And frankly, when you looked at them, you wouldn't have known they'd work either, because they were so different. And the car had come out of Flint, and the lock had come out of Pep Boys, and there wasn't really any reason why they should work, but they did, And neither George nor I ever carried a second key anymore. We didn't have to because, of course, it always worked. And so the miracle of the program, the miracle that supersedes, that transcends our own abilities sometimes, the time we need a miracle, always works for us in this program. And yet I didn't understand God. And one day I was talking to Addie Adams on the phone, and we were talking about raising money for Friendly House, a very spiritual conversation, you know, all these fundraising gimmicks that we were discussing. And in the middle of this, I said to her, Addie, I don't understand God. I don't have a God I can understand. And I could almost hear the wheels rewind, you know, while she got with me, but Addie always got with you, you know. And she came back in a couple of minutes with, I don't either, Wynn. I don't have a God I understand. But I wasn't looking for a God that I can understand. I looked for and found a God that understands me, knows all my needs, all my wants, everything I need, she said. He knows, and he tells me, and that's all I need to know. And she brought me home. And I accepted then a God that understands me, that knows my very best. And you gave me the way to this. You gave me the way to the life. The life is the one that we dig, each of us individually, for ourselves. We get it in proportion to what we're willing to give to it, what we're willing to get in here and take out of. And I would recommend, above all else, the study of this book. Not just the casual reading, but the study of, for it's ever new and ever revealing. And it is to all of us, I'm sure, from what I hear. One night, for instance, we were at a party and we got into a great big beef about the word must. Somebody said, I don't know why we keep saying there are no musts in this program when the word must is used 92 times in the AA book. Well, we were a bunch of egocentric maniacs, and we were all pretty equal in terms of sobriety, and nobody was going to confess that he didn't know whether there were 92 or not. So we broke up the party real fast in order to all go home and get to our books, you know, and to count the word must. So all I can say to you is that the word must is used 92 times in this AA book, and if you don't believe it, go home and underline them like we did. Because what it means, of course, is that I can't say to you, you must. You know, that's not my right. But I can say to Wynn Law's old girl, you must. You better. You must, because you want sobriety. And you want spiritual growth. And so you must. Because you must if you get these things. That's the price you pay. Is that good old four-letter word. Well, I had a lot of experiences in those months. And I was staying sober, the miracle, the great miracle of staying sober a day at a time. And one morning I awakened with the realization that my time was running out. I had a resentment against my mother. And I still had a resentment against my mother. I couldn't say I used to have a resentment, as I'd been able to say on the program 2 or 3 times. I had to face the fact that I had a resentment against my mother. Now, most of the resentments that I'd had fallen into their proper place. With the working of the 4th step and the really digging into the inventory and facing the resentment, with becoming willing to have my defects of character and shortcomings removed, many things that happened to me that had shown serious character defects that I had not found in my inventory, in all honesty. A very graphic one was an occasion that I was listening to Zoe Wheel, one of the most dramatic, magnetic, terrific women AA speakers, or women any kind of speakers I'd ever heard in my life. A gal second to none at the podium any place. And I listened to Zoe every chance I got. She was a friend of mine, and I liked her. I like her now. She's still a friend of mine. And every night when she finished, there'd be a great big standing ovation for Zoe. And every night I'd be almost the first one on my feet. And it wasn't until one night I was at a meeting when I rose spontaneously with the crowd after Zoe talked, and I realized that something was missing inside of me that had always been in me on these occasions. A little pain, a discomfort, something was not there that night that had always been there before. And I applauded vigorously, and I greeted her after the meeting with affection, and on my way home I kept trying to find out why I felt so good inside and I didn't have this pain or anything. And all of a sudden I realized that on every other occasion that I'd heard this gal talk, much as I loved her and much as I agreed with her and everything, I had had a great big gob of envy down here that had been pretty painful when I stood up with the rest of the crowd. And I'd always said to myself in my inventory, well, I don't envy anybody, because that's when you want something that somebody else has. And I don't really want anything that anybody else has. You know, I want my own. But that night I knew that this thing that I had felt up until that night had been envy, and it was only by its removal that I came to recognize it. And remember, I had been praying for freedom from character defects and shortcomings, and I wondered why. And as I reviewed that day, that one day, I hadn't done anything particularly spectacular by most people's standards, but I'd had one of those days that I'm sure we all have now and again, when I had a realization that that day I had truly done the best I could do in every area of my life I reflected on. A rare day, but that day. And with the realization that I had done the best I could do that day, my own performance apparently was satisfactory to me, and it was rewarding enough that I was free from envy of Zoe that night. And it was my good pleasure to tell Zoe about this, and we shared it, and we both grew from it. She was kind enough to say. And so that day when I awakened, with the awareness that I had this resentment against my mother, and I remembered that the book says that resentment is the dubious luxury of the non-alcoholic, but it's the number one killer of the alcoholic, that I realized something must be done about this resentment. I must be free of this resentment. And that morning I prayed as a child might pray, simply to have something pointed out to me that would let me walk free of this resentment against my mother. And I went on to the office, and that day somebody brought in a stack of magazines for me to take out to Norwalk State Hospital. And as I looked through them, there was a copy of an old Liberty magazine. And it took me a year to realize that, of course, it had to be a Liberty magazine. I was so concerned with self and self-problems, I didn't see it right away. And across the front, there was a banner, a condensation of Dr. Norman Vincent Peale's A Guide to Confident Living. And I cracked it. And there in big, bold, black type was the word resentment on the very first page in the first paragraph. And I read it. You bet I read it. And he said in there, if you have a resentment that you would be free of, if you would walk free, pray for the person or the thing or the institutions that you resent, and you will be free. Pray for everything that you would have for yourself, for them, and you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their wealth, everything you would ask for yourself in prayer. Ask for them. and you will be free. Well, I guess you know that I pulled myself up to my complete 5'5" and said, well, sinner I may be, but hypocrite I certainly am not, and how phony can you get? But something made me go on and read, and he knew that I was going to say that, because in the next paragraph he said, even if you feel like a complete phony, and it's the last thing in the world you want to do, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks, he said, and at the end of 2 weeks, even reluctantly you've done it every day, you'll find that you're coming to mean it. You actually mean this that you're asking for. And what's more important, you'll be free. Do it every day for 2 weeks. Well, it worked for me. And because it worked for me, of course, it'll work for everybody, because there are no favorites among the children of God. And it's worked for me many, many times since. And it will work for me any time I'm willing to work it. And there have been times that I have had to pray to be willing to be willing. And I heard a new way to do this prayer. I wonder if I dare do this from the podium. I've never done anything like this from the podium before, but I understand they've got a real shortcut in L.A., and when all else fails, they describe this very quickly by saying very simply, pray for the son of a bitch. And I'm told that it works just as well as if you'd gone through all that thing I just went through. The important thing is it works. And it will work anytime we are willing to work it. Now, this book makes it clear that once we have put into action these 11 principles of this program, and we get to the 12th, it so emphatically says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of those steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And so we qualify to carry the message of recovery when we put into action these principles. We are guaranteed here a spiritual awakening as the result of the practice of. And I'd like to share with you an experience that I had in Toronto, the only one I can share from the podium like this. Seriously, I had the pleasure of attending a women's meeting in Toronto that Denny didn't have anything to do with. And I heard a woman get up to the podium, and she, I thought, was nervous and perhaps moved by being included in this panel presentation, because the tears were just running down her face. And she stood there for a minute and said, I have an artificial leg. And I was sitting there thinking that if I didn't have an artificial leg, and I tried to stand up when I was called upon, that I'd simply pitch forward on my face. And she said, then it occurred to me that because I'm an alcoholic, if I didn't have this program and I were called on and I stood up, I'd probably pitch forward onto my face. But she said, I want to tell you about an experience that we had in our home this past week. I have 3 children, she said, and I'm very anxious for them to have this spiritual way of life from their childhood right on up to adulthood. So she said each night before dinner, we say the Lord's Prayer. And she said my wee one said, because she was hungry and impatient, Why do we have to pray every night before dinner? Why do we have to ask for our daily bread every day? Can't we just do this once a week or something and have it have the same effect? And her older sister said, look, dummy, the reason we pray for our daily bread every day is because we want it fresh. And I heartily recommend it.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, power it on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. Shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.